Dear Lord, we ask you through the presence of your Holy Spirit to be with us as we study the message of the hour, as we read through some of the articles from the Vespers classes. We ask you to help us to understand. Lord, I know that I don't have a mind for the things that we're studying. And so we just ask you, Lord, to help us to sort all this out. We might better understand the message and better be equipped and prepared for the work that you've called us to do. We thank you and we praise you and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So some of you guys are in classes with Aaron, right?
Right.
Has he shown you the Vespers class on the line?
Not me.
Okay.
No, he did a little summary with me on each class, but the last two he hasn't covered yet.
Okay. Just real briefly, I only have it kind of roughly in my mind, but let me pull this up. You guys watch out. Need to tip that up, right? Better?
Yeah, that's better. Oh, we can see the top. That's good.
Okay. I'm not going to do it. I only have a rough idea in my mind of how he did it, but just want to kind of get a visual while there's a wrestling match under my legs. Okay. So let's just go through our line again. Not that line. The big line, 144,000. And what do we have here?
Okay, so you want us to unmute? Okay. So we're on the 144,000 point again.
I was thinking I had to turn my volume up, but yeah, unmute helps. Yeah,
Okay.
44,000 line.
So 1989. Everybody else jump in.
9/11.
9/11, let's go.
Sunday law. Close of probation.
Okay.
Mhm.
We have this. We have this.
2019.
2019 and
19.
21.
21. Okay. And the message here and here.
Feminism and radical feminism.
Okay. Okay, so we're in here, right? We're hearing the Vespers classes. We had, we were to go down to, yeah. Priest line. We had 2014, 19, and 21. And this midway point is Sunday law, right? Did I do that right?
I think so. I believe so.
Okay. I always have to have one in front of me to do it. So we got 19, and this would be Sunday law. And then you would have this one, and this goes to post probation then, is that right?
Yes,
That is right, okay.
the last line, yes.
So this would be 21. And this would be Sunday law. And then that's Sunday law. So yeah, that would be their midway point. And they're in their latter rain. Okay. They are in their latter rain. Okay. So we've got this Vespers class. We have walked through this history. The way I understand it, we understand it is we go through a series of tests, right? We get an increase of knowledge and a formalization and then a test at each one of these places here. So we get an increase of knowledge, a formalization, and then a test, right? What's different about this one?
It's a
Which one?
great test that determines our destiny, I guess.
It's also the loud cry.
Yeah. So when we came through these tests, we proceeded forward, right? This one determines our eternal destiny. Can we afford to have this wrong?
Of course not.
No,
And I know I'm probably not doing this as well as I could, but just to understand the importance of the Vespers classes. We've been doing all our review. Why? Because
right?
all this information on feminism and radical feminism, equality was coming in. And when you were back at 2018, that you're back here in 2018, did you understand equality?
No.
Did you even understand it really here?
No,
No.
Do we still really understand it well?
No,
no,
So the reviews are to help us with what we haven't comprehended as we've gone along this journey. And Vespers now is, best way I can understand it, maybe somebody else can put it another way. It's like fine tuning and zeroing in on the Sunday law as it relates to equality.
the hole's getting smaller.
Yeah. But unlike these ones, this one, you fail, it determines our eternal destiny. You see that?
yes,
Yes,
this is the last opportunity.
That's speaking to us anyways. So yeah, I probably didn't do that very well, but I think you guys got the point.
Yeah.
Kind of put a fear in me. I mean, I've had that fear all along, but it's like, okay, we need to really be sure we understand this and we're on the same page and the right page going forward, especially when we hear her so much talk about people failing the test. And knowing, you know, how are we doing? The way I understand it is we could be accepting organization, accepting all, you know, you hear her say that there are people not even watching Vespers, or some that are watching Vespers, and then during the week, she referred to as watching nonsense during the week. Anyways, I just wanted to lay that out there. So I have 3 articles that I pulled up, and which one we can choose, which one do you want? Well, we've already did, and we need to review it again, but we already did do not dare to tell me human rights are not universal. So between the other two, the one about Israel or paleoconservatism, we might be able to, well, I don't know if we'll go through both of them, but we might be able to. Which one do you guys want to look at first? The paleoconservatism, the movement that explains Donald Trump explained, or Israel?
Israel.
Israel, okay. Remember where I put that one, because I have them all open. Okay. So I was looking at this one the last couple of days. I'm not quite done with it myself. I don't know, has anybody else started reading it?
Yeah, I read this, and basically what I got out of this general overview, she talked about straw man a couple of Vespers ago. And this is what and reading this, you know, we pick out the most easiest thing to attack. And you know, the easiest, the obvious, but the easiest to attack is not all there is. There's so much more in between. And if we're really honest with ourselves, and if we really look at everything in between, not the two extreme views, but everything in between, which I think people are not willing to do. And I think that's where the conflict comes from, is because we're not really willing to be honest. We're not willing to look at all the issues, because, you know, we're looking at Palestine and we're looking at Israel, the good guy, the bad guy, you know, and just like she was talking about Navalny and Putin, you know, both bad, but compared to what? So you need to compare, you need to contrast. And we got to put all the pieces of the puzzle together before we can really understand, you know, what the conflict is all about. And in this, you know, in this, what is this? This article, you know, she talks about, you know, the man who was walking underneath the building, and another man up on the higher floor, he's trying to escape the fire, that his building's on fire, and he lands on the man below, and it breaks his, the man above breaks the man below's body, some parts of the body. And if you really try to understand each other's perspective, why things were done the way it was done, then there really should be no argument, because, you know, it wasn't the man's fault that he had to jump out of the window, who broke the body of the lower man. And so if they understood all that and the circumstances, there would be less of an argument, less of a conflict. So reading this, it made me realize it's neither Israel's fault nor the Arabs' fault. But it's easier to blame the straw man, because that's where the conflict is, and nothing gets settled. It's always going to be an ongoing war. That's what I got of it, anyways.
Good. Anybody else?
I think the article for me is helping us to see the ideology of the left and what is wrong with it. And the whole article brings out their argument and how they have come to see the issues. Their view is similar to the far right. So this whole issue of the Palestinian-Israel conflict, as it is compared also with the South Africa apartheid, while there are so many other dictators out there, authoritative, oppressive governments, the far right, the far left chooses to single out one country to suit their ideology.
So let me see if I can make this understandable for me. I think I get that. And because I read through that part, I think I only had a couple pages left to read. Like take, for instance, maybe this is a wrong example, so stop me if it is. Take, for instance, the situation with Amber Heard. Yeah, there's all this bias involved and a lack of information. What we're getting is the whole, what we're learning to look at is the whole story. And the whole story does change your perspective, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
I mean, some people's minds certainly won't be changed in the case of Amber Heard. They're going to hold their bias and that's all there is to it. But people that are, maybe that's how she meant that, I don't know, honest, people that are honest will look at the whole story. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, people, like I said, if we are honest about this, we will look at both sides of the stories and the whole story, because there's just certain people, as Elder Tess's last Vespers mentioned, when she mentioned Lindy Chamberlain's predicament with her, with her child being taken away by the dingo. She was saying how other women still and continues to believe after 40 years later that Lindy is guilty and nothing is going to change their mind.
You went muffled on us.
Oh, okay, I don't know what you heard.
Got it. I can hear you now. Lindy Chamberlain, and
Right.
40 years.
Right. So after 40 years, there's some women who still refuse to believe that Lindy is innocent. And they'll take that to their deathbed saying that Lindy is guilty of killing her child. And some people, nothing is going to change their minds. They're going to hold on to it till their deathbed. And that's all there is to it.
Even though the evidence was proven that she didn't do it, that it was the dingo. Right.
So, so it's going to be like that with anything and with everybody. With Amber Heard's case, with the Johnny, this case, there are people who are just going to believe that Amber is a liar and a manipulator and all of that, no matter what the evidence holds, because they came in with that preconceived idea, and they're going to go out with that preconceived idea, and nothing is going to change their minds. But there are those who will be honest and weigh all the evidence and see the entire picture, and then maybe have their minds changed.
Yeah. The thing that's, maybe it's just me, maybe it's not just me, maybe there's other people too. Going back to the Amber Heard thing, just because to me, it's a good, clear example of, it shows people's willingness or love of hate, if that makes sense. Love to hate.
I think it has to do something with the judicial process, where in England, she presented her evidence before the magistrate, And being a trained attorney, he can see through the testimony of what is real and what is not, what is fabricated and what is embellished or whatever. And when she presented it there, the magistrate saw through Johnny Depp that all his testimony wasn't all that he thought it was. And so he awarded her, I think it was 19 out of 21 charges and in favor of Amber Heard. Whereas you come to the American judicial system and your fate is decided by 12 jurors. And jurors, if you present an emotional enough presentation, you can sway the jurors. Also, if you don't have a lack of remorse or any of that, can sway them the other way too. So hers case was decided by people here, and probably a lot of the people in the jurors were lovers of Johnny Depp.
And unwilling to hear
Right.
the evidence.
And I don't know if anybody watched the interview on NBC of Amber Heard's, her first interview. And she says, the interviewer asked her, you presented your case and the court found that you were lacking and that your case was not believable of what you said. In other words, she was lying. And she says, I don't know what to say. I presented a mountain of evidence and I had fault in our relationship and he had fault. But at the same time, she was saying that the things she presented were truth, but that nobody saw it. And they saw their hero being attacked by his ex-girlfriend or wife or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And I think that plays a big part in it, is who's judging it.
Right.
Right.
And who's judging it is, unlike a trained attorney or a trained judge, who's judging now is society. As Elder Tess said, it's yes, you have the 12, you have a jury made up of 12 jurors, but they're part of the society. And that's what I believe Elder Tess is trying to emphasize to us, that we cannot be part of that society. And she's grooming us, Elder Tess. She's grooming us. She's teaching us through these Vespers. So when we read articles, when we hear these cases, we can sift out all the noise and really look at what's critical, the real issue, and sift out all the other garbage, and really decide what is truth and what is error.
Yeah.
And I
And
think
good
also,
points. Oh, excuse me.
go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, 1.2 is that from what Francisco and Phil said, that I saw was that people on the outside, or people that are biased, are judging these people, or Amber Heard, or on the basis, and even the case with the dingo and the child and the mother, they're judging them on the basis of their emotion.
Yeah.
I thought that was incredible because they showed emotion or they didn't show emotion. It wasn't according to what they judged as what they would appear to be not guilty or guilty. If they cried or they didn't cry, or they didn't cry enough. When, you know, they're judging that because, oh, you lost your child, but you're not showing the emotion that you lost your child. So now we are going to side against you and you are guilty. So I just thought that was a really good point that really stuck in my mind. Getting judged as to whether you are innocent or guilty by the way your emotions are. With Amber, they made fun of her when she cried. Oh, she's not sincere. She's lying. You know, this was Johnny's fan club. And, you know, all that bias out there, according to how their expectation was of how she should have been acting, or how she didn't act. So,
Yeah, I found that very interesting also, that we are judged by their bias of how we should act in certain circumstances, certain situations.
yes,
So like Kate McCann and Lindy Chamberlain, as you said, you know, they didn't show as a woman, I suppose, as a woman, as a mother, they showed lack of emotions. They didn't cry enough. So
yeah,
therefore they must be guilty.
yes, absolutely. It's horrible.
That's ridiculous. You know, never mind the evidence.
Yeah, for sure.
I still think of Pharaoh and Moses going to Pharaoh and saying, let my people go. And as the plagues fell, things got worse and worse and worse for Egypt. And some of those people went to Pharaoh and said, look, Egypt's destroyed. It's over. Let them go. And what did Pharaoh do? Every step of the way.
Hardens
Hardened
his
his
heart.
heart.
Hardens his heart.
To where you can't even, because I mean, I think about this, I think, what makes a person actually, to me, I just think it's horrible that people, and I always have, that people take pleasure off of someone else's pain and suffering. And that's what, to me, we see a lot of things. That's one of the things I see in all this is how people are actually enjoying it. Enjoying it to the point that on my Facebook page, I saw someone post, and I've seen it go around and being used by different marketing products. And it's shown as a conversation that they had after the trial, Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. And it has this little bit of dialogue going back and forth, and she's asking him to look at her, and he doesn't, and he looks at his lawyer and he kind of shrugs it off, and then, you know, it kind of goes back and forth, and then, you know, she says something else, and don't you have anything to say or something like that. And then they use their product that they're trying to sell by saying that he then speaks up and says, you need to go buy and such and whatever. And they're literally using it to market their product they're selling. I so badly wanted to put a comment. And usually I'll weigh those things out in my mind before I do. I used to do it more before, but really selective when I do it, because you know they're not going to hear what you want to say, but I would more so do it for maybe somebody else that looks at this thread is going to have a conscience. But I'll usually weigh it out. It's like you can almost predict their answers, their responses. I don't care if they attack me. I don't care about that. But it's just sad when you feel like, I mean, I have family members that are participating in a lot of this stuff too. It's like, how did we get to such a place that there's so much joy out of someone's suffering and hurt? That just to me is like hard to comprehend that people actually have that kind of mind, and they do. They're enjoying what they're doing. When, like Phil was saying in like this article, that you took the time to be honest with yourself and look at the evidence, look at all the factors involved, not willing to have their perspective changed.
I have one other thought, because I read this article instead of just watching it on the video of the Human Rights Raoul
Yeah,
Wallenberg Institute.
yeah,
I mean, I miss so much when I'm watching it, but when I read it, and I took it step by step, paragraph by paragraph, this week so far. And the one thing that stood out in my mind is this quote about ignorance and contempt of human rights have been among the principal causes of the sufferings of humanity. That's a quote.
yeah, I remember that one. We read it. I don't know if you were with us when we read it, but that one stuck out on me too.
Yes. It's very, and I bullet point this, it's very real suffering. And of course, when you have people of this bias that don't even bother to get into what the real facts are, they're totally ignorant at the expense of someone else, of someone's human rights.
Yeah,
Horrible.
I'm reminded of the story of when they dragged that lady in front of Jesus, wanting to stone her, you know, for her adultery, or their claim to adultery anyways. And Jesus just turned away and started writing everybody's sins on the ground. And they left one by one. You know, they looked at the sin of her, or what they considered sin, but they overlooked their own.
what did Jesus say?
He told them that anyone that's without sin cast the first stone.
That was what I was tempted to post the other day.
And no one could even look at a stone, let alone pick one up.
Yeah,
I was reminded of an event that took place quite a few years ago, of a Southern young white lady who had, her claim was that somebody had abducted her baby. And I think she ended up claiming that it was Black folk that took her, but when it all came out, and she would cry constantly, but she never had no tears. She would always cry, but never had tears. And I kind of found that strange. And I said, she did something to that baby. And it turned out to be that she had killed her own baby and disposed of the body or something. It was quite a few years ago.
Susan Smith?
I can't even remember what the name, but she was from the South, and for her to be proclaiming Black people did this to her, I thought it was just incendiary. I mean, you want to rile the folks up, that would do it.
Yeah, I think it was Susan Smith.
Yeah, probably so. And I think I forget what all happened because it's kind of vague to me, but everybody was on her side, and then she turned out to be the culprit at the end, you know. And I believe they showed her mercy because she was a mother and that kind of thing. She had some mental problems or whatever the thing was. But everybody had jumped to her defense.
Yeah.
Without even weighing over the facts, kind of thing.
Interesting. Humanity is very interesting at times, but it's sad what we're seeing today. Okay, so singling out Israel, a perspective from the left. The left is frequently accused of singling Israel out for censure. Of all the authoritarian and oppressive countries in the world, so the argument goes, left-wing thinkers and activists disproportionately target the Middle East only democracy. This is often just a rhetorical ploy, a propaganda device used to imply that Israel's critics are biased, or worse, prejudiced. However, it also happens to be true. So somebody put that in their own words. Israel's the Middle East only democracy, right? According to the article. And left-wing thinkers and activists target them. This is often just a rhetorical ploy, propaganda, to imply. So it's biased. Is that correct? To say that. Oh, I can't, if somebody's talking, I can't, I mean, I can tell somebody's talking, but I can't hear you.
I don't understand the paragraph. I just don't understand what they're saying.
Yeah, I was having trouble too. That's why I'm trying to ask somebody to unpack it in their own words that can maybe understand it and explain it to us better.
So in the first line, they're talking about the left,
right,
or the liberal, frequently accused of singling out Israel out for censure. So they're not liking what some of the things that Israel is doing. And
so there's an accusation.
Right, and other people are saying, well, you keep accusing Israel, you know, out for censure, like they're targeting Israel from the left, because it says the left is frequently accused of singling Israel out for censure. So the left is singling out Israel because of something they're doing wrong, or they perceive it to be wrong, and probably against Palestine more than anything else.
Well, I think this one here is just singling out Israel.
Right.
All right, so we haven't gone to the Palestinians yet. So the left-wing thinkers, which are the liberals and the liberal activists, they disproportionately target the Middle East only democracy, which I'm assuming is Israel, because
Right.
we're talking about Israel being censured. Right. So right now we have what is that called? Divestment. Divestment from Israel. That's I know the activists. That's one of the things that they're trying to really push is divesting away from Israel. And this is the liberals. These are the left-wing thinkers, the activists. They disproportionately target the Middle East only democracy, which is Israel. So Israel is being singled out. They're being censured. And the left-wing thinkers and activists are disproportionately targeting the Middle East only democracy, which is Israel. And so that part I understand. It's the next sentence that I'm having trouble with. This is often just a rhetorical ploy, a propaganda device used to imply that Israel's critiques are biased or worse, prejudiced.
So if Israel's critics are the left that's accusing and singling out Israel, their critics are saying that that the left is, let's see.
No, you have the left singling out or calling out Israel for their authoritarian type of rule. So the critics, the people who are criticizing the left, are calling them out for that. They are saying there are many other authoritarian governments in the world. Why are you only criticizing Israel?
Right.
So they are saying here, the last sentence, this is often just a rhetorical ploy and a propaganda by the critics, which is also true, is a true case. That's what they are doing.
Yeah, so it's kind of saying that this is what they accuse Israel, and the critics are saying, implying that it's bias. This is often a rhetorical ploy, propaganda device used to imply that Israel's critics, which should be the left, right?
Which is the left.
Are biased. And then it says, however, it happens to be true. So in other words, the left is actually singling out Israel, if I followed that correctly.
Okay.
It's also saying that of all the authoritarian and oppressive countries in the world, you're singling out Israel, which is the Middle East only democracy. So it's also on the second sentence on the top of the paragraph. It says, of all the authoritarian and oppressive countries in the world, so the argument goes, left-wingers, thinkers, and activists disproportionately target the Middle East only democracy, which is Israel.
So you have all the authoritarian, oppressive countries.
But you're picking Israel to point it out.
Which is the democracy, the only democracy.
Right.
And you're the critic of Israel, when maybe what you ought to be doing is be the critic of the authoritarian and oppressive countries, correct? Is that?
They should be pointing out everybody's problem, not just the one country, that it makes them look like they're targeting, because they're pointing the finger at Israel versus including China, India, whatever country is out there, they're just singling out Israel, and they're our ally and they're a democracy, whereas the other ones are
Authoritarian and oppressive.
authoritarian states, right?
So
Yeah.
wouldn't this be like supporting what the Anya Prampel showing up in the I forgot the name of the show.
The gray zone.
Yes,
Tucker Carlson.
yeah, Tucker Carlson, yeah.
Yeah.
So they're far left and far right sort of joining together here, coming in unity.
I don't know on that. I'm not saying yes or no because I don't know. I'm just trying to unpack I have a really hard time. This is not necessarily a double negative, but I have a really hard time following reading when the sentences, for me, when I always think of it as a double negative sentence. That's not the case necessarily here, but that's what I always struggle with. is to be-
Right. I understand. I understand what you're saying, Elaine, because I think the writer, the structuring of the sentences are complicated, at least for me.
Yeah.
And we do have to pick it apart like we're doing now to understand it.
Okay, so this is often just a rhetorical ploy. What's a rhetorical ploy or propaganda device? Is that the left is accused of singling out, Israel for censure. And this is a rhetorical ploy or a propaganda device to imply that Israel's critics, the left, are biased or worse, prejudiced. However, it also happens to be true. So the left is accusing, if I followed that correctly, and singling out Israel for censure. Is that correct? That's the way you guys see it?
Yeah, the way I see it is that so the left is critical of Israel. And so the writer of this article is saying that's just a rhetorical ploy. And that's because the left, in criticizing Israel, they are biased and they are prejudiced, but it's just implied, but he says it happens to be true. It's not just an implication. He believes it's true. The writer believes it's true that the left is being critical of singling out Israel for censure.
So Israel's critics, the critics are the left, and it's used to imply that the left is critical, or the left is biased or prejudiced. But then that last sentence says that it happens to be true. So is that sentence applying to the left is actually biased and prejudiced, or is actually singling out Israel?
Right. So go ahead.
The left is prejudiced, is biased, is singling out Israel. How there are so many other authoritarian countries which are doing the same thing as the Israel are doing, and the left is not calling them out. So they are biased.
Right. So they're biased against Israel by singling them out while not calling upon the other authoritarian and oppressive regimes.
Okay. So they're biased towards Israel when they ought to be looking at the authoritarian and oppressive countries as well, or is that right?
They should be focusing on oppression, no matter where it comes out, even if it comes out of Israel. Is what should be done.
Yes, they are not calling out Yemen. The Yemen people are dying, but the left are not. Nobody's saying anything about those.
Right.
Absolutely true.
Yeah.
Right. So nobody's saying anything about, well, few people actually are saying, but not en masse, are not saying anything about the Saudi Arabia.
So because if you single out like China and Russia and Nicaragua or wherever, and you know, if you call them all out, including Israel, then you're consistent because you're calling out all the bad things that are done by these countries, but you're also pointing out that democratic countries that are doing wrong too, you're pointing that out as well. So you're consistent in your criticism. But if you don't, then you're going to look biased in some ways for not calling that out.
So
I don't know if that makes sense, but
So in looking up censure as a verb, express severe disapproval, especially in a formal statement, or a noun, the expression of formal disapproval. So they're accused of singling out Israel for censure, disapproval then, right, of what Israel does.
Right. So the left-wing thinkers, the activists, they're singling out Israel. They're calling out Israel and disapproving of their actions.
Okay. So states everywhere behave in a manner comparable to Israel. Occupation, states everywhere behave in a manner comparable to Israel. Occupation, ethnic nationalism, exclusion, racism. These are systemic issues, products of the modern nation-state system we live in, and not the unique characteristics of any particular country or nationalist ideology. So he's saying that states everywhere behave
Comparable to Israel. So
right.
there's many authoritarian, oppressive countries that are doing the same thing that Israel's doing. They're comparable, which is occupation, ethnic nationalism, exclusion, racism. These are all systemic issues, not just Israel.
Right. And this particular, even though they don't bring, he doesn't bring Palestinians down here, but this is what they've done, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yet Israel and the Palestinians struggle for self-determination occupies a position within the left's political imagination that is incommensurate with its relative size or importance in the international struggle for justice. Israel's crimes, and they are crimes, against the Palestinians elicit a moral outrage that comparable acts of brutality in other countries, India, in Kashmir, Russia, in Chechnya, to name only a few examples, do not. Okay, so Israel's crimes, and they are crimes against the Palestinians, elicit a moral outrage that comparable acts of brutality in other countries do not. So the two sides struggle for self-determination. Occupies, yet Israel and the Palestinian struggle for self-determination occupies a position within the left's political imagination that is incommensurate.
Can we look that up, please?
Yeah, I was going to. Out of keeping or proportion with. Man's influence on the earth's surface seems incommensurate with his scale. Okay, so looking at proportion, not in the right, out of proportion. So yet Israel and the Palestinian struggle for self-determination occupies a position within the left's political imagination that is out of proportion with its relative size or importance in the international struggle for justice. Israel and Palestinian struggle occupies a position within the left's political imagination that is out of proportion with its relative size or importance in the international struggle. Israel's crimes, and they are crimes, against the Palestinians elicit a moral outrage that comparable acts of brutality in other countries do not. So
if I'm to understand this correctly, the left is preoccupied more so with Israel and Palestinian struggle, as opposed to all the brutalities and crimes that are going on in other countries.
that's how I think I understand it too. That there's out of proportion focus on the Israel and Palestinian struggle. That's what you said, right?
Yes.
So it's Israel's crimes against the Palestinians elicit a moral outrage that comparable acts of brutality in other countries do not. That's just repeating the out of proportion then, correct?
Yes, because there's these examples that's given, India and Kashmir and Russia and Chechnya, they're doing just as brutal, their acts are just as brutal, but they're not the focus. So the left's focus on the Palestinian, the Israel issue is out of proportion when all these other countries are doing just as bad, or if not worse.
And it states that in the second paragraph, it says states everywhere behave in a manner comparable to Israel. Occupation, ethnic nationalism, exclusion, racism, these are systemic issues, products of a modern nation state system we live in, and not unique characteristics of any particular country or nationalist ideology.
So Israel's not the only one.
What's not unique, that's what it's saying.
Right. Occupation, ethnic nationalism, exclusion, racism. It's happening everywhere, but there's an out of proportion focus on Israel
By the left.
by the left.
Right, instead of pointing out all this racism, nationalism, and all this other stuff, of all the countries around the world, they're just singling out Israel and not even mentioning the other countries that are doing the same thing. So there is a little, at this point, it looks like there is bias going on by the left.
So
Yeah,
with this-
I think for me, it helps me to see the subject, who's the subject here. The point of focus is the left-wing mindset, and the way they are handling this conflict in Israel just reveals their bias and the hidden agenda, because all those other countries, they are doing the same, if not worse, and they are not calling them out. They're not crying out. But when it comes to Palestinians, the cry is blown out of proportion.
Exactly.
So is that last sentence then Israel's crimes? Is that Israel's crimes against Palestinians elicit a moral outrage? So this is talking about the left then, in the left's view, the left's perspective, is that correct? That Israel's crimes against the Palestinians elicit a moral outrage that compared to the brutality in other countries do not? Is that correct to say that?
Yes.
Okay, going back to the subject, what Mary just put it up. That Israel's crimes, according to how the perspective of the left is, Israel's crimes are being looked at out of proportion to what the brutality of other countries.
Right. So after incommensurate says with its relative size or importance in the international struggle for justice. So everybody's struggling for justice because there's other regimes, other countries, other authoritarian countries that are doing the same exact thing, if not worse, than Israel, yet the left focus is on Israel.
Okay,
So the focus is on the left in this article from
yes,
what it
Yeah,
appears to be.
yes.
yeah, that's what it says, singling out Israel, perspective from the left. So we're looking at this is giving us the perspective of the left. So you have all these other nations that are all doing the same thing, some even worse. But the left is singling out Israel for their crimes against the Palestinians more than others, more than other countries for their crimes. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. So this is often dismissed as mere whataboutery, or simply buying into one of Israel's favored propaganda tropes. But the question of how the struggle for Palestine, an unquestionably just cause, has gained such prominence on the left is one that needs addressing seriously. The answer can also perhaps tell us something about broader patterns of thought in left-wing politics today. The question of how the struggle for Palestine, an unquestionably just cause, has gained such prominence on the left. Question of how the struggle for Palestine, an unquestionably just cause, has gained such prominence on the left is one that needs addressing seriously. The answer can also perhaps tell us something about broader patterns of thought in left-wing politics today. So that's what we're trying to look at, is left-wing politics today, the thought behind the left wing, correct?
The thought
Yeah.
process, the pattern of thoughts, how they think, how the left wing thinks when it comes to today's politics.
Now, this is the left and not the far left, or is it both?
I don't think it's specified.
Okay.
It just says the left.
Yeah, we're just starting to learn about the far left through the group called Gray, what is it, Gray Stone?
The gray zone.
Gray Zone, Gray Zone.
And she did say that in reading this article, read it, I don't know if I'm going to say the right word, not necessarily in context, I don't remember, but in what's the word, in conjunction with, I don't know, with the one, the other one, I have it here. Do not dare to tell me human rights are not universal. Right? So we have to
Yes.
keep that in our mind at the same time about the other article about human rights being universal. And we're looking at, just from quick observation, the left is focused on Israel when there's so much else that's going on. That's how I understood it. Is that how did you guys understand that?
That's how I see it too.
Okay. A new anti-Semitism. Semitism. For some, the reason is obvious. Anti-Semitism. In his response to the divestiture campaign on US campuses against Israel, the New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman wrote, singling out Israel, oh, here's a big one, we'll have to look up, for opprobrium and international sanction out of all proportion to any other party in the Middle East is anti-Semitic and not saying so dishonest, and not saying so is dishonest. Okay. Harsh criticism or censure. So going back to the censure. Public disgrace arising from someone's shameful conduct. So for some, the reason is obvious. So this is what he's saying, if I understand correctly, the left is doing this, singling out Israel and their crimes above the only democracy in the Middle East, singling out their crimes against Palestinians above all the others that are oppressive and doing all the same things, the ethnic cleansing, what did it say? Occupation, ethnic nationalism, racism, that they're singling out, the left is singling out, and for some reason, the reason is obvious, anti-Semitism. Hostility to or prejudice against Jewish people, we all know that. In response to the divestiture campaign, the action of or process of selling a subsidiary business interest or investments. In response to the divestiture campaign on US campuses against Israel, the New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman wrote, singling out Israel for, this was censure, right? And international sanction out of all proportion to any other party in the Middle East. That goes back to the beginning, what we read, singling them out of proportion, and out of all the Middle East, when they're the only democracy in the Middle East, is anti-Semitic, and not saying so is dishonest. So he's saying that to do this is anti-Semitic, and by not saying so, you're being dishonest.
So they're saying here, I don't know if I'm understanding it, the left is calling out his name and shaming Israel for human rights violation alone, singling them out, and not calling out all the other countries that are doing the same, is anti-Semitic. So they are just focusing on Israel alone.
Right. And by not saying so, in other words, they're not saying that they're anti-Semitic, right? They're being dishonest.
Right. So the writer is saying that because Israel is preoccupied, focusing only on this issue with Israel,
The left.
the left, yes, the left focusing on Israel oppressing the Palestinians, that they want sanctions, international sanction, and censure, singling out Israel is anti-Semitic, and to say otherwise is being dishonest.
Right. So whatever reasons you give, what he says that the reason is obvious. Okay, so this argument is often dismissed as ideologically motivated special pleading. Let's see, this argument is often dismissed as ideologically motivated special pleading. These words don't go together well in my mind.
So can we say that this is racism because it's anti-Jews?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The argument is often dismissed. Is the argument that they're anti-Semitic? Is that the argument he's referring to? This argument, I think he's talking about this, singling out Israel for censure and international sanction is anti-Semitic. I think that's the argument he's talking about. Is that correct? This argument is this, correct?
Yes.
That's what I see it as.
So the argument that the left is anti-Semitic is often dismissed as ideologically motivated special pleading. I don't think that's going to get me anywhere. The perpetrator motivated by extremist views, including religious, political, racist, and single issue ideologies. Special pleading. This argument is often dismissed as ideologically motivated special pleading. Somebody can unpack that. Special pleading. It's saying it's not accurate. Saying that argument that they're anti-Semitic is.
Like a special attention is given.
Who's talking? I can't hear you.
Yeah, we're trying to figure that out too. And that sentence is, I don't know, the words, those 4 words written in that order.
I'm glad I'm not alone.
Yeah, we're trying to figure what that means. And because well, if you read the next sentence, it's this, and sometimes it is. So sometimes it is ideologically motivated special pleading. So, and sometimes it is ideologically motivated special pleading. So this argument is dismissed as ideologically motivated special pleading, and sometimes it is ideologically motivated special pleading. So ideologically is what they believe in. So what they believe, so what they say and what they do is motivated by what they believe in. That's the ideology. So special pleading, when you're pleading, you're asking for favor. So you're asking for some kind of a special attention that's given, special favor.
I think they're asking to be heard. The special pleading is to be that their thoughts. They're asking what they see. They want people to hear. A special pleading. You know, so they see something wrong. They perceive it to be wrong, and they want people to hear it. Is what I'm getting from that. And they're pleading for it, you know, please listen to me. This is what I see. Whether they're anti-Semitic or not.
So we know that this is, the argument is what's said in the previous paragraph, singling out Israel for censure and international sanction out of all proportion to any other party in the Middle East is anti-Semitic. This argument that it's anti-Semitic is dismissed. So it's dismissed that they're anti-Semitic. Is that correct? Because the reason is given, saying the reason is obvious, it's anti-Semitism. That the left is singling out Israel for censure and international sanction is anti-Semitism. They're doing it out of all proportion to any other party in the Middle East, and it's anti-Semitic to single out Israel and dishonest. So this argument that they're anti-Semitic is dismissed as ideologically motivated special pleading.
This new anti-Semitism, the left are being they're being racist, they are being anti-Jew, they are anti-Semitic, but this argument is being dismissed as just an idea, it's just a view, while in reality they are anti-Semitic. It's not just a view, it's not just a position they hold in head. They are anti-Semitic.
Yeah, because we finished the paragraph, but we should be careful on this score. Saying sometimes the argument, the argument is often dismissed as ideological motivation, and sometimes it is. The argument is often dismissed as ideologically motivated special pleading, and sometimes it is. So sometimes it is ideologically motivated special pleading, but we should be careful on this score. So sometimes it is, they're anti-Semitic, and the argument is dismissed as being ideologically motivated, but sometimes it is ideologically motivated. But we should be careful on this score. Now he's going to define it. The left is not immune from prejudice, and historically, anti-Semitism has found a home at both ends of the political spectrum. So the writer is still saying that they are anti-Semitic. They're not immune from prejudice.
And I think Elder Tess has brought that point out too in her presentations, that that there's guilt on both ends.
Yes, yes. So while there is an argument that the left being anti-Semitic is ideologically motivated, dismissed as ideological motivated special pleading, sometimes it is, but the left is not immune from prejudice. The left is not immune from being anti-Semitic. And being anti-Semitic is found on both ends of the political spectrum. So we're seeing the left, according to this article, the perspective of the left as anti-Semitic. Is that a good summary of this page?
I believe so.
Can anybody add to that? Is there anything to add to that? Okay, we'll go to the next one. As an explanation for the left's disproportionate focus on Israel, okay, now this is an explanation of their disproportionate focus on Israel and the Palestinians. It is, however, unconvincing. As an explanation for the left's disproportionate focus on Israel and the Palestinians, it is, however, unconvincing. Okay, is it, no, help unpack that one. Is that what's talking about the previous one, that are they anti-Semitic or not? As an explanation for the left's disproportionate focus on Israel and the Palestinians, it is, however, unconvincing. So they're saying that it's not convincing, this argument?
That's what it seems to be saying now. So the argument was they're anti-Semitic, but now it seems to be saying that that argument, perhaps that argument alone, is not convincing. So as we read on, there's probably more. So just that simple explanation is not all there is.
Okay. True anti-Semitism sometimes creeps into anti-Zionist discourse. What's the difference?
I don't know yet.
Anti-Zionism is opposition to Zionism. The term is broadly defined in the modern era as opposition to the state of Israel, or prior to 1948, the Jewish community.
So anti-Zionist pertains to the state of Israel, and anti-Semitism pertains to the people. Is that what it is?
I don't know. Keep that one in your mind. Hostility to or prejudice against the Jewish people.
Okay, so one's to the people and one's to the state.
Okay. Why the difference?
Isn't it the Zionists, is the Jews wanting to settle in Palestine and establish their own state because they're persecuted everywhere else? So they're trying to find their own homeland. They're back in Palestine.
So this is hatred against the Jews, and this is hatred against the Jews having their own land.
Yeah,
Well,
that's what
yeah,
they're
the state. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have much. I just think of having their own state, a place for them to call their home, you know.
So one is for the people against the Jewish people, and the other one's for the against the Jewish government. That's how I understand it.
Opposition to Zionism. Okay, the meaning of anti-Zionism is opposition to the establishment or support of the state of Israel. Opposition to Zionism. The opposition to Zionism, the movement for the self-determination. We found that word up before, the self-determination. They want their own, they want to be their own people and statehood. Like
Right.
back
So
when
one's for the people and one's for the institution.
yeah, like back when the times of Christ, when they wanted Christ to come and take out Rome so that they can be reestablished as their own nation, right?
Yes, that sounds familiar.
Self-determination and statehood of the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland. So you might be anti-Semitic. How it seems like you might be against, help me if this, you might be against having them have their own, go back to their homeland and be self-determined and have their own place, but still not be against Jews. Is that how you would understand that?
The opposite reminds me of like in the Civil War, where the abolitionists wanted to send the Black people back to Africa. So they were okay with them to have their own place as long as it wasn't in the United States. So they were against the Black people, but not against them having their own place back somewhere else. That's what it reminded me of. But it can be the other way around too, where you could like an individual Jew, but not want them to have their own place. One of the articles I was reading was talking about like I forget if it was the British or who wanted them to have their own place so they could ship them off over there so people could get rid of them out of their own countries, the Jews, and send them back to their own place. You know, like,
I think that's in this article, if you read
is
it.
it?
Yeah,
Okay.
where it goes into that. Because it goes into colonialization. Did I say that word right?
Yeah.
Almost sounds libertarian in the way it's viewed.
Explain that.
Well, like, you know, if as long as it doesn't affect themselves, they can have their own country. But if it affects them, they're against it, kind of thing. So if they can have their own place, then that's good, because then they would be out of their space or whatever, kind of like you guys were talking. If they had their own place, then they can leave and go to their own homeland or glorious land, or whichever, you know, thing you want to call it.
So he says, true, those who hate the Jews, or the hatred of the Jews, sometimes creeps into the hatred of a Zionist nation, the Jews having their homeland, having their own, being self-determined, having their own place. So sometimes the two come together.
What did we say that Zionism is?
Yeah, that's a good question right there. What is Zionism?
Yeah, that's what we were just looking at
I'm
right here.
looking it up, and they are saying it's an ideology, just like the white supremacy, the Jewish people being above the Palestinians, while the Semitism is anti-Semitism is hatred for the Jewish people, just hatred. Anti-Zionism is that ideology that they are above. It's not just the hatred, it's just being above all others. Just like the white supremacy.
Wow.
I thought it was like against them organizing into their own space, like the state.
Yeah, I don't know where you're reading from.
Who, Mary or me?
Mary. Because we've got a whole bunch of different definitions here that are showing up. One, let's see, this one. Thus, anti-Zionism means that you are against the Jewish people's right to their own state and the right to practice our self-determination. Anti-Zionism is prejudice against the Jewish movement for self-determination. So Zionism is this movement for self-determination and the right for the Jewish people to a homeland in the state of Israel.
But what Mary's saying is, it makes sense that the Jews want their own homeland. They think they're above the Palestinians. So yeah, it's like white, supremacy. It makes sense.
Yeah, I agree.
Say that again then, Mary, if you would, please.
What?
Yeah, say it again.
I was trying to look where I found the source, I can't figure it out, but they were saying it's the ideology that the Jewish are superior than the Palestinians. So yes, they are establishing, after 1948, they established the nation, but the Palestinians are living still within the nation. Therefore, the Zionists see themselves superior above the Palestinians.
Also, too, the Jewish people, God gave them that land. That's their land, they figure, not the Palestinians, too.
Well, he's definitely making a distinction between anti-Semitism, which is hatred of the Jews, to anti-Zionists, and saying sometimes hatred for the Jews creeps into those that are against Zionism. Okay, let's keep going. But the notion that the left has become anti-Semitic en masse is frankly absurd. If you doubt this, then ask yourself the following. Given the history of Israel-Palestine, would attitudes on the left be any different if Israel was a Christian country of European origin? I suspect not. Would attitudes on the left be any different if Israel was a Christian country of European origin?
Attitudes on the left be any different?
I can't hear you. You say that again?
Yeah, no, I'm trying to just digest that.
Okay. The notion that the left has become anti-Semitic en masse. So he's saying that not all of them, I guess, is what en masse is meaning, that not all of them. To say that all of them are en masse, I don't know if it's all, but a lot of them, let's see, in a group altogether, saying that the whole of the left has become anti-Semitic is absurd. If you doubt this, so we're breaking it down, and according to this article, breaking it down and seeing that it's absurd to think that all of the left hates the Jews.
So not all of the left is anti-Semitic.
And if you doubt this, let's see. If you believe that all of the left is anti-Semitic, let's see, if you doubt this, let's see, but the notion that the left has become anti-Semitic en masse is absurd.
Right, so that part is saying that not everyone in the left is
Right.
anti-Semitic.
So if you doubt this, doubt what? If you doubt that not everyone is anti-Semitic?
Right.
If you doubt that not everyone, in other words, if you think everyone is anti-Semitic, is that?
Yeah, so if you think that everyone in the left is anti-Semitic,
okay, then ask yourself the following. Okay, if you think that the whole of the left is anti-Semitic, ask yourself this, given the history of Israel and Palestine, we're going to read below more. Would attitudes on the left be any different if Israel was a Christian country in European origin? If you think the whole of the left is anti-Semitic, would your attitude on the left be would attitudes on the left, if they're all anti-Semitic, would the attitudes of the left, all these people that are anti-Semitic, be any different if Israel was a Christian country in European origin? I suspect not. So they would single out a Christian country in of European origin?
He's saying, I think not. I suspect not. They wouldn't single out.
I mean, would your attitude on the left be any different?
Yeah, so you have to compare it with Israel. If what the view is of Israel and Zionists, with if it were a Christian country of European origin.
would the attitude on the left be any different if Israel was a Christian country? Not a Jewish country, but a Christian country. So would attitude of the left be any different if Israel was a Christian country? And he's saying no, it wouldn't be any different.
And I think where he specifies a Christian country of European origin, would that be implying that if Israel's a Christian country, they're of European origin, so now they're going to go back to Europe and self-define themselves?
I think that's where he's going, because that's where the Israelites came from.
Correct.
Yeah.
So can we say this is a culture war? I mean, this is post-Christian, so it doesn't matter if it's a Christian nation or not. This is beyond Christianity. Is that what this author is saying?
I don't know. We broke down that first sentence to say that if you doubt this, when he's saying that the notion that the left has become anti-Semitic, all of them are anti-Semitic, is absurd. So if you doubt that it's absurd, or rather than if you think that all of the left is anti-Semitic, then ask yourself this question. that if Israel's now this Christian country of European origin and it's going to go back and reestablish itself, go into Europe, wherever that would be, and reestablish itself, if the whole of the left were anti-Semitic. They would have to be anti-Christian if Israel was Christian country, right?
So instead of being, because the author doesn't think it's going to make a difference, that instead of Israel being a Jewish nation, it's now a Christian nation, and it's not going to make a bit of difference.
If Israel went back to Europe.
Of the European origin, which they are.
Okay. Okay, so now we saw that he said that this was unconvincing. The explanation for the left's disproportionate focus on Israel is, however, unconvincing. So it's not enough evidence here, I think is how you described that. Two explanations that are frequently given in response to the singling out accusation concern Israel's relationship with the US. Two explanations that are frequently given in response to the singling out of Israel accusation concern Israel's relationship with the US. Firstly, it is argued Israel is one of America's major allies in the Middle East and is a recipient of roughly $3 billion per year in aid. In this context, singling it out makes strategic sense from an anti-imperialist perspective.
So anti-imperialist.
I always have to
What
think
does that
these work
mean?
through. Yeah, I mean, we know because we've been looking at it, but boy,
Yeah,
I have trouble holding them all in my head. Okay, anti-imperial. So you got imperialism, and now we're looking at anti-imperialism.
mhm.
Political science and international relations is a term used in a variety of contexts, usually by nationalist movements who want to secede from a large polity or as a specific theory opposed to capitalism in Leninist discourse derived from Vladimir Lenin's work, Imperialism.
So
Any-
anti-imperialism is against nationalism. Is that right?
I think so. Let's think that through. As early use of the term anti-imperialist occurred after the United States entered the Spanish-American War in 1898, most activists supported the war itself, but opposed the annexation of new territory, especially the Philippines. The Anti-Imperialist League was founded on June 15th, 1898 in Boston in opposition to the acquisition of the Philippines, which would happen anyway. The anti-imperialists opposed expansion because they believed imperialism violated the credo of republicanism.
Violated the credo.
So the anti-imperialism, if somebody help me out, maybe that's what we'll look at.
It's against expansionism of other countries.
Yeah, so the imperialist wants to go in and colonize other areas. Do I have that right?
Right. The anti-imperialist is the opposite.
We need imperialism.
That's what eventually happens. Imperialism, powerful country.
Can't hear you. If you're talking to us, I can't hear you. Yeah.
That's the first argument.
Yeah.
First perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. A policy of extending a country's power and influence through diplomacy or military force. So, so you're going to put yourself, those are the ones that are putting themselves expansionism that are out there putting yourself in the business of others. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so first, it is argued Israel is one of America's major allies in the Middle East and a recipient of roughly $3 billion per year in aid. In this context, that Israel is one of our major allies, and we give them $3 billion a year in aid. In this context, singling it out makes strategic sense from an anti-imperialist perspective.
Yes, I can see that. Otherwise, why are they giving them $3 billion per year? If it wasn't coming from an anti-imperialist perspective. That's helping them.
Well, doesn't anti-imperialist mean you're against helping them?
I thought it was just the opposite. Imperialist is aggressiveness and expansionism.
Well, I got imperialism over here, a policy of extending a country's power and influence through diplomacy or military force. Go ahead, Francisco.
That's what we're guilty of as being the United States of America. We change governments through proxy wars, and we do covert operations where we overturn governments, to bring Western style democracy to them. And then
Right.
we use them as allies, so we can put military bases there, and then we can, what do they call that? Expand our sphere.
Expansionism.
No, expand
you
our sphere of influence.
Oh, in the spheres of influence. True.
Right, because now we have allies in the middle of all these other countries that don't like us, and we can do stuff,
Yeah, manipulate.
right? Which we do. I mean, we're
Yeah,
guilty.
yeah, for sure.
So it's going back to it's the two explanations that is going to propose here, given in response to the singling out accusation. That singling out accusation concern Israel's relationship with the US. Okay, so first, it is argued Israel's one of America's, so this is countering against that accusation. If I'm really twisted trying to follow this. countering against the singling out accusations. So here's America. Israel is one of America's major allies. We give them $3 billion a year in aid. So in this context, singling it out makes strategic sense from an anti-imperialist perspective.
So the $3 billion per year that's given to Israel by the United States.
But is that not still helping and extending a country's power and influence through diplomacy and military force?
Yeah, it would be. I mean, they are our ally.
But this is anti, that's where I'm confused. So in this context, singling it out, the accusation, singling it out makes strategic sense. So it's an accusation against the left.
No, the left is the one that is singling out Israel and calling it out as well, the United States is the dominating power. It's controlling Israel through economic and political ways, and in return, Israel is dominating Palestinian. So America supports Israel.
Yeah, it's our
Israel.
ally.
Yeah, I get that, but it's the accusation is that Israel, or that the left is singling out Israel to as and showing that they're anti-Semitic, hating the Jews. That's where I'm
Yeah, I'm confused
struggling to follow with that.
over that.
So if they're helping them, they're
This is
helping
the
them.
relationship between the Israel, the first sentence there, Israel's relationship with the US.
Israel is one of America's.
And this part of this relationship is that Israel is one of America's major allies in the Middle East. So if US and Israel have this relationship and the US helps them, it says in this context, singling Israel out makes strategic sense from an anti-imperialist perspective. This fell with us?
Yeah, and I'm trying to, I'm trying to figure that out too. So the explanation that was given above in page 1 that we read, that was unconvincing, right? The simple explanation of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, those explanations, right? Those were not convincing. So now we're going to a more convincing explanation. So going towards a more convincing explanation, we have two arguments. And so we're mulling over the first one. So the two explanations that are frequently given in response to the singling out. So the singling out is the left singling out Israel. So that's the accusation concern Israel's relationship. So it has to do with our relationship with, that singling out has to do with Israel's relationship with the United States. Okay, so firstly, it is argued Israel is one of America's major allies. So we're friends. Okay, we take care of each other in the Middle East, and Israel receives roughly $3 billion per year in aid. So in this context, so knowing this, singling it out makes strategic sense. So singling out, so the left singling out Israel makes strategic sense from a non-expansionist perspective. So this argument would make sense from a strategic sense of a non-expansionist or anti-imperialist or non-expansionist perspective. So if you have a non-expansionist perspective, this singling out makes sense. So, I mean, do the left have a non-expansion perspective? I don't know, but
Well,
it just seems to be making a statement that U.S. being or allies with Israel in aiding Israel with $3 billion a year, in this context, it makes strategic sense if from an anti-imperialist perspective or a non-expansionist perspective. So he's just making a statement here.
yeah, and remember what she laid out is that the difference, I may not say this quite the way, but you'll probably remember what I'm talking about, where she laid out the left and the right between unipolar and multipolar. And the ones on the far left,
They're multipolar, but they're coming from an opposite direction but their views end up in the same place.
Right. Multipolar in meaning that let everybody do their own thing.
Yeah, leave everybody alone so they can govern their own way, whatever that looks like.
And the
We
unipolar,
shouldn't meddle.
yeah, and the unipolar is that you meddle in the business of others.
Right. So unipolar would be an expansionist. We should go into other countries and meddle and do the things that we want them to do. So that's an imperialist. So unipolar would be an imperialistic perspective, whereas a multipolar, leave them alone, let them govern, let them do what they want to do, would be an anti-imperialist perspective.
Yeah, I got you. That's good. I could see that. Because the United States supports Israel, and it's proven by the fact that they give them $3 billion a year. They're their ally, but they're not there to change their ideology. They're only there to support and not try to meddle and get into their politics or their issues with other countries. But they have a big issue with Palestine. So I don't know how that plays out, but
Right. So I think this writer is just making an argument that in this context, U.S. giving aid to Israel, it just in this context, it makes sense if you're coming from a non-expansionist perspective. So that's your first argument. That's your first convincing explanation.
yes. And the second one is good too. There's two of them.
Maybe we'll just read it and then close and pick this up next time. Because I need more time here. The second argument is a corollary of the first. What does that mean?
It's like the same. It follows the logic of the first.
Okay. Forming a proposition that follows from one already proved. Okay. The second argument is corollary of the first. Given the close relationship between Washington and Tel Aviv, pressure applied by activists in the former capital will be keenly felt in the latter, and so concentrating resources there is a logical move.
So that's the reason for money. I'd have to talk that out a little bit. The
So
reason that they're getting the money from us, the support with money.
So given the close relationship between Washington and Tel Aviv, so the United States and Israel, and here they just mentioned the two capitals, Washington and Tel Aviv. Pressure applied by activists. So we're thinking the left here, because that's the perspective of the left. Pressure applied by activists, maybe the far left, in the former, which is Washington, will be keenly felt in Tel Aviv. So what happens what happens in Washington will be felt in Tel Aviv. And therefore, to concentrate the resources there, and I'm thinking there is Washington, is a logical move. So because you're not going to go to Tel Aviv and protest, but since protesting in Washington, Tel Aviv is going to feel the pressure of it, you protest, you're an activist and you protest in Washington, which by doing that, Tel Aviv will feel the pain.
Let's pick up here next time because I still struggle with some of this. But the next paragraph seems to help a little bit, but we better close off for now. Anybody have any comments?
We're speaking about politics here, so it's going to be complicated and not always fair from what I can see. And I think that's what's throwing us off, because it is political.
Yeah, I have to agree with Francisco, because this is a language of which we were not familiar.
Yeah, it's not straightforward either. You know, it's really,
Yeah. So I think we're doing a good thing by trying to understand the heart, because that's what Elder Tess wants us to do, is understand the core, the heart of the matter, and where these issues are coming from. And because the language is different, because it is politics, language that we're not familiar with, you know, it's you know, as we say, you know, it's Greek to me.
And what you see is not all there is.
Exactly.
Do we know the stance of the author, their point of view? Or are they left? Are they right? Are they against the left? Are they against the right? Do we know that?
good question.
Maybe we'll look at that next time we look at this.
Okay.
I think that would be this guy. How did the struggle for Palestine gain such prominence on the left? Okay, so I think that this would be the author. Lives and works in the UK as an MA in Middle Eastern Studies. Reviews academic books on the Middle East. Okay.
Is
Go
that
back.
the magazine, the paper Open Democracy?
What was that?
The title of that, the source, Open Democracy.
Yeah,
Is
the
that-
link, the
Yeah.
link is in that's
It
not
was opendemocracy.net.
yeah, and the link is in the document. Where was that? It must be right here. Yeah, the link's in the document, and I sent the document out, so you can click on that link. Okay. Somebody want to close in prayer?
Yeah, it can close.
Good to have you with us, by the way.
Thank you. We thank you, most merciful God, for this opportunity to further our study and knowledge of where you need us to go, see and hear and do. We pray and hope that we give an acceptable effort into this study. And we also want to give you thanks and praise, Lord, for all the wonderful things you do in our lives. We thank you for the fellowship and for the time in your holy presence. And we pray all this in the holy and mighty name of Yahshua, Jesus, the Christ. Amen.
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 Thank you.